So I've been transfixed by this conspiracy for over a year. The real identity of Satoshi Nakamoto and the claim to this pseudonymous throne by this man, Dr. Craig Wright, one of the most fascinating humans to ever exist.
And if I have to stab you 1 billion times before you fall over.
With this man as our main character, this story has to be a thrilling tale. One that actually involves Vladimir Putin, Bill Clinton, the MI6 agent who was found dead in a locked suitcase, and over $200 billion worth of the first ever Bitcoin. But we'll get to all that in good time. Right now, I want to focus on Craig, because he is one of the most polarizing figures you'll ever see. And he's not polarizing in the Andrew Tate, Jordan Peterson way, where there's a large section of the population that love them and a large one that hates them. Craig is the type of polarizing that 95% of people dislike him or even despise him. And on the surface, it's not hard to see why.
I'm Australian, and if you're going to be a wanker, I'll call you a wanker.
But loving or hating Craig has nothing to do with the most important question. Is Craig Wright Satoshi Nakamoto? So in this video, I want to drink the Craig Wright Kool-Aid and investigate why some of the smartest minds in the blockchain space think Craig actually might be Satoshi. And I must admit, if you put on your devil's advocate hat for this video, you're going to be quite shocked. So after hours of researching, the 3 most compelling reasons why Craig Wright might actually be Satoshi are these. Number 1, his talent and qualification. Craig is the most decorated cybersecurity and digital forensics specialist of all time. And this is verifiable on the GIAC website, where you can scroll through Craig's accolade. But it took him a long time to get to this point. Craig Wright started his career in IT in 1985 for Kmart. Yes, that's right, in 1985, Craig started working with computers. In the 90s, he designed the architecture for the world's first online casino. He was integral in setting up the mobile telecom network in Australia and was employed by the Australian Securities Exchange, where he ran cybersecurity and their firewalls. Progressing into the 2000s, Craig's job was to prevent online currency fraud at an online casino called Centrebet. And then he went on to be an information systems manager at BDO, which is important, and we'll get to that later in the video. Craig has 2 PhDs, and after he finishes the current degrees that he's studying, he will have 27 university degrees. Yes, 1, I recognize this is an absurd amount of degrees, and 2, I recognize that none of this proves that he's Satoshi Nakamoto, but it does make it very clear that Craig is exceptionally talented and very capable of developing some impressive technology. Which takes us to point number 2, the IP, intellectual property that Craig Wright owns, and his insane depth of knowledge that's almost unmatched by anybody else on this earth. I mean, for starters, a lot of people don't know this, but there's one man on earth that owns the copyright to the Bitcoin Genesis database and owns the copyright for the original Bitcoin white paper. It's Craig Wright. He also owns the largest library of blockchain patents, including a very impressive one on completely on-chain NFT technology from 2016. But beyond what he owns on paper, Craig Wright's mind owns some of the most impressive explanations and insights from the original Bitcoin white paper. In fact, he has over 50 hours available on YouTube of him explaining the original Bitcoin white paper line by line, with insights and explanations that have never been heard before. Like why the original Bitcoin has a double hash feature, or the most famous example, it's Turing completeness. Because you see, all the way up to 2016, the most brightest minds in the blockchain and Bitcoin space thought that Bitcoin was not Turing complete, until a now famous conference, until Nick Szabo, who was recognized as the #1 blockchain expert, and Craig Wright were both invited as speakers. And without getting into nitty-gritty details, Nick Szabo said that Bitcoin is not Turing complete. Craig Wright then dropped an absolute bombshell, and he was the first person ever who claimed that Bitcoin was in fact Turing complete. This left Nick Szabo, who once again was one of the foremost recognized experts on blockchain and digital cash, absolutely clueless, and had to respond like this.
Well, this would be a good topic for you to write a paper on, because that's certainly an unconventional view you have.
He disagreed with Craig and said he'd never heard this before in his life, and if Craig is actually serious about this, he should write a paper. So Craig did exactly that and wrote a paper proving that Bitcoin was in fact Turing complete. And this is not the only time he has done this. And thirdly, the time that Craig Wright actually provided cryptographic proof that he has access to the private keys that only Satoshi Nakamoto would have. And not only this, he provided social proof as well. Now this brings us to the 3rd point, because you have a lot of people out there saying, well, if Craig Wright is Satoshi, why doesn't he just move some of the original Bitcoin or provide the private keys that only Satoshi Nakamoto would have access to? Well, the answer is he did. And not only did he provide the private key, but he provided some inside social information that only Satoshi Nakamoto would know. Now, unfortunately, he did not do this publicly, but he did do it to a man called Gavin Andresen. And Gavin Andresen was the guy that ran Bitcoin after Satoshi Nakamoto disappeared in 2011. 2011, someone who knew the original Satoshi Nakamoto very well. The two met in a hotel room in London, and firstly, Craig Wright revealed private details to Gavin that he would only know if he wrote these original emails between them. Craig Wright was able to provide the private key from the first ever Bitcoin block to sign a message that Gavin created for him. Gavin says, Craig Wright signed a message that I chose. Gavin's favorite number is 11 CSW, and he signed it using the private key from block number 1. That signature was copied to a clean USB stick that I brought with me to London and then validated on a brand new laptop with a freshly downloaded copy of Electrum. And Gavin recently testified in court that he still believes Craig Wright is Satoshi Nakamoto. That's a pretty strong reference. Now, there are hundreds of other pieces of evidence that point to Craig Wright potentially being Satoshi Nakamoto. I didn't want to include them all in this video so it doesn't go for over an hour, but I wanted to do a little bit of a speed round to finish just to show you how deep this rabbit hole really goes. So in the early Bitcoin forum days, Satoshi actually spoke in the tongue of the Commonwealth as opposed to US style English. This is where you use a U in the word honor, you spell specialized with an S, and you spell programs with 2 M's and an E. This is the spelling and language that we use here in Australia, where Craig Wright is originally from. Funny enough, the original Satoshi on those forums also had a tendency to use the word bloody and has the amazing quote saying, I hope we don't run into any snags, an expression most common in Australia. And of all the OGs that we currently know of the blockchain, Craig Wright is the only one of them from Australia. A lot of people also don't know, in the original Bitcoin white paper and script, Satoshi coded in a virtual poker game. Now this would be very fitting from someone who coded the first ever online casino. Bitcoin was also programmed in a language called Forth, and in the late 90s, Craig Wright programmed the software for fighter jets in the language of Forth, and no other early Bitcoin adopter is known to code in Forth. Satoshi Nakamoto himself has actually been known to discredit people who aren't really Satoshi Nakamoto. Like this man, who came across the mainstream media and shares the name Satoshi Nakamoto. Now the real Satoshi actually came out and said that Dorian Satoshi Nakamoto, this man, is not the real Satoshi. But Satoshi himself has never actually come out and denied that Craig Wright is Satoshi. In 2007, Craig Wright, while working at BDO, actually pitched the idea of Bitcoin to be created through that business. And evidence of this still exists and was presented recently in court. And lastly, Craig Wright is the only person in the world who is running a blockchain to the exact specifications of the original Bitcoin white paper. His blockchain is called Bitcoin Satoshi Vision. Now, we are only scratching the surface of this insane story. And I must admit, there is also a very strong case showing that Craig Wright is not Satoshi, including a shady legal record where he was sentenced to 28 days in prison, backdated articles and tampering with evidence which Craig Wright actually admits to, and the fact that he put forward Bitcoin addresses that he said belonged to Satoshi, who then came out and printed that Craig Wright is not Satoshi. So if you're interested in seeing this entire story unfold, let me know in the comments below and I'll make it for you. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.